Section 5, Chapters 14 and 15. In this section, Klee and I discuss and expand on embracing your inner weird creative. We also dive deep into how imagination is not exclusive and how we are always using our imagination. We also expand a little on our childhood and growing up as that weird kid. We talk in length about the world of imagination and how to use it help you grow your possibilities as an artist and in life.
Let's talk about embracing your inner weird, which might be my favorite section. I don't know if I have a favorite section. I like them all a lot, but I like this one quite a bit.
Well, you would. I mean, you are weird, so...
Yeah, I suppose, if the shoe fits, right? You and I both grew up with weird as a bad word, but kind of for different reasons. So weird was definitely not something that your mom wanted to be, that your mom wanted you to be, that you wanted to be as a little kid.
Yes. Yeah. So my mom, being first generation Cuban in New York back in like the 70s and 80s, the idea of being different in any way, there was a lot of racism and a lot of stuff like that. So when it came down to it, there was like a very visceral, like the idea that you were weird meant that you were different, meant that you were going to get picked on, that you were just not good enough to fit in. So I think a lot of it came from there.
Yeah, and so I could definitely understand that motivation.
Right.
Your mom being in a place that is completely not what she knows.
Now, obviously, for me, that translated into something else because I always felt like I was a weird kid. And then, I kind of embraced the idea of being different than everyone else at some point. But what I learned was that being different was bad.
Right.
Like, you should be normal. You should fit in with everyone else.
I had a similar experience. I grew up in a very small rural community where everybody was kind of all up in everyone else's business. And it was a moderately affluent community that we were kind of like, we didn't necessarily feel like we belonged there, but my mom really wanted to be there for my education.
Right.
But we were kind of like lower income. So financially, we were sort of singled out in that community. My parents had, of course, their personal struggles and their personal dramas. And like in a community like that where parents, there's gossip and rumors and so-and-so's doing this and so-and-so's doing that. From that angle, you also don't want to stand out.
Right.
You don't want to be the one that all the families are talking about after the PTA meeting, right?
Right.
And you don't want to be that weird kid either. You want to fit in with those kids. You want to have friends. And I remember being little and because of some of the stuff that was going on with my family, my mom and dad, I remember one of my friends was actually told that she wasn't allowed to be friends anymore with me because her mom had decided that my parents weren't a good influence. And that was the world that I grew up in. So you really, like, for that reason, I really badly wanted to fit in, really badly wanted to be accepted, and really did not want to be perceived as weird or different.
Yeah.
And it actually wasn't probably for me until after school, after I graduated high school, that I really embraced my inner weird, that I understood that I could choose my people.
Right.
And that to do so, though, I had to basically be who I was.
Right.
And stop trying to be something else.
Yeah, instead of trying to fit in by pretending to be someone else, that way you could just be yourself and let your people find you.
Absolutely. Now, I went really far in the other direction as far as embracing my inner weird. I just went full on into who Klee is. And thank you, by the way, for saying that I'm your hero.
You are.
Of embracing the inner weird. But I do, because my weirdness is very much childlike, I guess, in a way. Like, I get really excited about stuff. I think every inanimate object has a personality.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the important things that I wanted to make clear in the book, that, being weird doesn't mean that you're like the creepy weird guy that's just standing off in a corner staring at you. Like, when I say weird, I just mean like against the grain. Basically, I mean rogue, like embracing your inner rogue, like something that is not necessarily normal for people to do, and really embracing the idea that none of us are normal. There's no such thing as normal.
Right, we are a bunch of weirdos.
Yeah,
every last one of us.
It's just people trying to fit into a system, fit into labels and the way that things are supposed to be and fit into society. And basically being normal just means that you are trying to fit into a system that is not necessarily you. Whether it's economic, like you were saying, growing up in an affluent area, or whether it is being able to fit in racially, or whatever the case is, whenever you are hiding aspects of you and part of your humor and part of your personality and the things that get you excited, in order to try and fit in with other people, it's the same thing as going to a business meeting and trying to sound like, oh yeah, I'm a business guy and I definitely know about business, and realizing that like you just spent the last 30 minutes trying to impress someone instead of just being yourself.
All in the name of social acceptance, which is where you'll hear parents tell their kids, pipe down.
Yeah.
Or my grandma would always, especially if there was like an argument or something, we don't want, close the windows. What are the neighbors hearing? What
Right.
will the neighbors think was like a big deal, as you mentioned in the book. And that gets passed down the generations, like a lot of things. You do these things if you want to be socially acceptable. You don't ever ask for anything when we go anywhere because this and that.
It really does. We tend to pass down our fears to our children, not necessarily by like telling them the fear, but by you as a little sponge, you're observing these things, these behaviors, these little quirks here and there, and things like that become a matter of life and death when you're a kid.
Absolutely.
Well, grandma's really scared about what the neighbors might think, and then it gets kind of associated into this place in your mind where it is something that you're afraid of, deathly afraid of.
Absolutely. The thing I realized looking back is like, you can't really hide your inner weird. Like, no one really can. I was a weird kid, man.
Yep.
And I was a solitary kid, and kids didn't like me,
Yeah.
mostly. But I was gloriously weird, even though I thought I was doing a good job blending in. I was not. But now I'm just, full on embracing the uniqueness that is me. And I really revel in being around people that are also that way, because I feel like the weirdness of life is also like the magic of life.
Exactly.
It's like that movie that you like, Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium.
Yes.
Where everything is unusual and weird, and he gets really excited about things like pants.
Yeah. Yeah, where he's like, pants, and he's super excited about pants. And I think that like the what it is that playfulness and that excitement. Like basically it's almost like we're all these like amazing aliens, right?
Yeah.
So like, and we come down to this planet and then we try to pretend to be human, right? Mm-hmm. And we try to be a normal human, and you can't do anything that's going to make you stand out, because then everybody's going to know that you're an alien. You could replace the word alien with weird. Everybody's going to know that you're weird, so you got to try and fit in. And what ends up happening is that it's like those movies where you see like aliens trying to pretend to be humans and they're totally awkward and get it all wrong.
They're doing a very bad job.
Yeah, it's like that's basically what we're doing. So we're out there, we're trying to behave like we're normal, and we're failing miserably at it, and then getting on ourselves and really involving ourselves in a lot of negative talk because we're getting it wrong. We're getting it wrong. And the fact is, you're weird. You're you, the person who you actually are. You can't get that wrong.
No.
You could only get it wrong when you're trying to pretend to be something else, something that you're not. Absolutely.
And for me, my world looks a little more vivid and a little brighter when I'm just embracing the magic of the weirdness that is me and what I exist in. And that's how I choose it to be. And I think if everyone embraced their inner weird, and let their uniqueness shine through, there'd be a lot less flying around of insecurities and things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being a weird kid, I lived a lot in my imagination. And so in the next section, you talk about imagination is not an exclusive club. Here's the interesting thing about that. I was in my imagination all the time as a kid. Being an only child and being a loner.
Right.
Loner, weird kid. You spend a lot of time in your imagination. It's not even something you question as a kid.
Right.
As an adult, I actually carried the belief for years and years and years that I sucked at imagination. Like, that
Really?
that I had a weak imagination, not remembering or not putting two and two together, that I was in my imagination all the time. And even as an adult, I'm in my imagination quite often, like
Right.
more than a lot of people, probably.
Right.
Although I think everyone might say that. And it turned out what I wasn't practiced in was deliberate imagination.
Right.
Mostly it was like my imagination was running around knocking stuff over like a petulant child and making a ruckus, and I was just kind of letting it have a field day all the time.
It was one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure to put this in the book, because a lot of us artists pride ourselves because we think that we have a great imagination, and a lot of us creatives actually think that we don't have a good imagination. And the reason that I wanted to say that it wasn't part of an exclusive club is because you are constantly using your imagination. So like, whether or not you open your eyes and you're looking at the world and your mind is giving you whatever chatter it is that it's giving you about the world, you're imagining things right then and there. If you're looking at a beautiful tree, well, what is it that makes that tree beautiful? What is it in your imagination that's making that tree beautiful? And a lot of people think that in order to use your imagination that you have to close your eyes and vividly picture something. But in actuality, a lot of the way that we see the world and a lot of the way that we feel has everything to do with your imagination.
Absolutely. So, and it's literally happening all the time. Like you just said tree. I just pictured a tree.
Exactly.
You were still talking. I was picturing a tree, and then the leaves were blowing in the wind.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, snap back to conversation.
Right.
It happens all the time. As we were listening to these chapters, I was imagining how this commentary was going to go.
Right.
This particular section of commentary. And I was thinking about possibly what I was going to say, but I was also visualizing, this that's happening right now.
Right.
Now that's very neutral imagining.
It is very neutral, but the thing is that most of the time it's neutral, and also most of the time it's not. And it all depends on where you're at. Now, for the most part, the way that you approach the world, you're very neutral. We make it a point to try and remain neutral. But if you were a negative person, your imagination, most of the time when you'd be thinking about the past or thinking about the future, chances are you would be thinking about negative outcomes.
Worst case scenarios, situations not turning out right. Oh no, this is going to happen. And not even realize that you're just using your imagination. People think that sitting down and purposefully imagining something, that's when they're using their imagination, not realizing that your imagination is going full throttle all the time. Right. And I've heard so many people, and I've been one of those people, that they sit down to imagine and they close their eyes and they breathe and
Right.
they can't pull up the imagery that they're wanting to pull up. And so then they say, well, I'm not good at this.
Right.
And what it is you're not practiced in deliberate imagination, but you are literally doing it all the time. And I think it's acknowledging that it's not a thing that you sit down and do.
Right.
Just like meditation doesn't have to be a thing that you sit down and do.
Right.
You can just be in acknowledgement that you are imagining.
Yeah.
Chances are you're imagining something right now. Whatever, you might be imagining what Rafi and I look like sitting here doing this commentary.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you might be imagining a million other things, but it's almost like we're trying too hard when we're trying to imagine.
Exactly.
Not realizing you already do it just fine.
And that's the thing, like understanding that like you don't need to try.
Right.
You don't need to try. And it's not like some people have it and some people don't. Everyone has it. Anytime that somebody sat there and said, "Oh, I'm so scared," or "I'm worried about this thing that's going to happen tomorrow. I think I'm going to fail really badly." boom.
You're imagining.
You're using your imagination.
Now, I do that. I am pretty neutral, but I'm also something of a worrywart sometimes.
Right.
And so I do imagine like sad scenarios and possible bad outcomes and things like that. And I've tried to catch myself more in recent
Right.
times and realize that I'm using my powers for evil.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what I wanted to say in the chapter is like, you've got this you have this amazing mechanism where you could virtually do anything that you want in your imagination. I mean, anything that you want in your imagination. You could picture scenarios, circumstances, conversations. It's basically a virtual reality game that you have.
That's limitless.
That is limitless at your fingertips. You've got the most powerful virtual reality engine that exists on the planet, and we use it to worry about bills next month.
Yeah.
We use it to when you're going to do something that's outside of your comfort zone, to think that like the worst case scenario is going to happen. We use it in a way that is not very effective. Now, back in the day during caveman times, yeah, there was a benefit to having that very visceral, powerfully feeling imagination to warn you of something, because really it's those powerful feelings that cause you to really, really apply something to your memory. It just gets kind of burned into your subconscious. And what we don't realize is that you could do that the opposite way, using this very powerful imagination in a very deliberate way, where instead of thinking of worst case scenarios and don't go near that bush because there's a big tiger in it, thinking to yourself like something powerful and emotionally impactful that is really going to start rewriting that story that of worry wart, or fear of the unknown, or fear of this, or or looking at your past. A lot of people think that like when you're looking at your past and that you're actually like going into a storage bank of memories, and it just doesn't work that way. It's your imagination.
Yeah.
And you could do anything that you want with your imagination. If you're normal, we have a brain, and in the brain it has files, and then we do these and we only pull up the knowledge that we know, not understanding that the majority of what you think and feel is happening in your imagination.
Oh, absolutely.
Because every event that's happened in your life, you see it in your imagination. You're not seeing it in a storage file. It is all imagination.
Yeah, and based on how you're feeling in the moment, your memories can actually be altered
Yep.
by your imagination.
Yep.
You mentioned using your powers for good with your imagination, but you also talk about that basal fear response where, like caveman days where it was, healthy to maybe imagine worst case scenarios so that you could prepare for them. Well, this was news to me since I've known you. The practice of actually going into your imagination and facing the fear head on and letting it play out deliberately.
Right.
So my response normally, so let's say I'm using my imagination for evil against myself. I'm worrying about something. Oftentimes I'm not even aware that I'm doing it, right?
Right.
The moment I catch myself doing it, worrying, I'm like, I swat it away.
Right.
Like you mentioned in the book. Does it go away? No. That does not get rid of the fear. And so you talk about the positive mindset versus actually embracing the fear also. So what if that worst case scenario does play out? That was something I've started doing in recent days since knowing you, of actually looking at it.
Right.
Realizing it's only going to get louder if I keep swatting it away and distracting myself. And on top of that, usually what I'm imagining, non-deliberately imagining, is like way, way worse than it would likely be if I just faced it.
Usually when something like that pops into your mind where you're worried about an outcome or you're worried of the unknown or you're going outside of your comfort zone or there's something going on like that, basically what's happening there is that you have unresolved issues. Now think about it. The only time that you really ruminate on something is when you are ruminating on something because something is sort of not making sense or you left a conversation. Like when you have those imaginary arguments with somebody, it's because like they said something and then you stayed quiet and then later on you're like, ooh, I should have said this. And then you keep having these arguments with them because it's almost like you left it open-ended. So a lot of these fears that we have, it's because it's open-ended. It hasn't been resolved.
Right, and we haven't even defined for ourselves a lot of times what we're actually worried about.
Exactly. So like you're sitting there, you're grasping at straws, and it just keeps coming up in your mind like, what if I don't have the money to pay the bills next month or blah, 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 and it comes up in your mind. And most of the time what ends up happening is that doesn't feel good. So like you ruminate on it without realizing that you're ruminating, but the moment that you realize that you're sitting there thinking about that, you kind of swat it away and you don't actually investigate it. You leave it where it is. And the problem is that when you leave something where it is without going into it a little bit further, the next time it pops up, it's going to be exactly there.
Absolutely. So I want to just go into this just a little bit because this was something I was not familiar with or practiced in doing.
Right.
And I know that there are people out there that probably also would find this an unfamiliar technique to use. So basically the long and short of it is, so you asked me, because I was worried about money one day. Well, so what happens if you don't have money to pay the bills?
Right.
And I was like, well, that's not even exactly the worry. I think the worry is like that I'm imagining us not being able to pay the bills for like 3 months. It was during really slow times where the finances were a little scary. And you were like, okay, so then what? So then what happens in your imagination if we can't pay the bills for 3 months? And so then I'm like, oh, I don't know. I never get that far.
Right.
That's where I slotted away.
I remember that. Yeah.
So then you were like, well, so what happens? Imagine it. And I was like, well, I guess, like we have to come up with some kind of arrangement with our landlords. And then what? In my worst case scenario imagination, well, then they're really mean and they tell us, which they wouldn't be, but they would, they tell us that we have to go. That's the worst case scenario. Well, then what? Well, then all of our stuff is out on the street. We have nowhere to put it. Like it's raining on us. All of a sudden we're the scourge. We have nowhere to live and we're just there. All of our stuff is wet. And then people come and pillage our stuff and we have no stuff and someone comes and takes our car away. And it was like going into it. And you were like, play it out to the end because there's obviously some fear here of like loss and suffering. And so at the end of it, I guess, it's like homeless, probably getting sick because you're out in the elements, having nowhere to go, isolation, and then realizing like, well, I would still have you. Right. I would still have my wits about me. I would still have my faculties. Chances are I would figure out what to do at that point.
Yeah, and that was what was at the core of it. It was like you're sitting there and imagining these things and you're imagining the worst case scenario. And really at the core of it was, I don't trust myself to be able to figure these things out.
Yes, that was at the core of it. And you also posed a good question, which was like, what are we doing in your imagination for 3 months while there's no money coming in? Are we just sitting around being sad or are we problem solving? And I was like, oh, I guess in my imagination, we're trying to problem solve, but nothing's working out. Right. And so then we're sad.
Right. so like we're completely unproductive because we're just like, everything sucks so bad.
And in doing that investigation, it really was that, I wasn't sure that I could start over again with nothing or figure out how to keep going.
And basically that was the fear. Like, what if I lost everything? Yeah. And these are questions that I like to challenge myself and ask myself. And I know I know that there are people out there that ask themselves these questions, but I also know that I spent the vast majority of my life avoiding these kind of questions because they're painful. They're very, very painful when you start to really look deep into what's going on with you and why it is that you have these fears, because most times every single one of these fears is based on some way, shape, or form of you failing, denying yourself, being a bad person, not being enough. Like, it always comes back to some kind of insecurity that revolves itself around you. And somewhere along the lines, over the years, you've built up and stacked all of these ideas and thoughts of these scenarios and situations that you've imagined vividly that just come together to form these pictures that are horrible.
Yeah, that are
horrible situation. And most times you don't even investigate it and go further and just go down into the deepest recesses of how horrible it's going to get, because I've seen people do that where, like, I start to ask them a question and the question starts to go in a little bit deeper and they're like, oh no, I don't want to talk about that.
That's where I stop.
That's where that's I don't know. I don't know. And I'm like, well, if you did know, what would it be? And they're like, well, I don't know. I don't think about that kind of stuff. When it comes to positive thinking, a lot of the dynamics out there, and I'm not knocking positive thinking. I think positive thinking is awesome. But I also have seen the side of positive thinking where the person avoids thinking about these negative situations because they're afraid that they're going to cause it or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you're not going to get in deep into your insecurities and figure out what the core reason is unless you actually look at these things and follow it through and determine, like, wait a second, this is the programming. This is what I've put into my imagination. This is the thing that I keep imagining over and over and over like a broken record. Isn't it time to change this?
Absolutely. And this might seem frivolous to some, but just in my example and realizing, oh, I don't trust my own ability to take care of myself.
Right.
But I've proven to myself time and time again that I can take care of myself.
Right.
It really did help alleviate my money worries going forward. Did I get rid of them entirely? No. But am I a lot further along than I was before looking at those things? Absolutely, because we're talking about my capability as a human.
Exactly. The ability to be able to keep putting one foot after the other when you're walking towards direction versus giving up completely. And you could always tell when there are people out there that really second guess and question the things that are happening in their imagination, because you hear it in the way that they talk to you. A lot of times I talk about empowering yourself, and some people will come back and they'll be like, yeah, like, this is what I did, and like my brain was trying to tell me one thing and whatever. And then you have people out there that will take that same statement and say, like, yeah, like, my brain is my biggest enemy, and like,
yes,
I just can't do anything about it.
And that's just
blah,
the
blah,
way
blah,
it
blah,
is.
It's just the way it is. And like, they just buy into the stories that they're telling themselves, not realizing that they're the ones making up those stories.
Absolutely. And it may take you some time, and it may take a little work, and it may take a little delving into areas that are painful that you don't want to turn that around. But I would rather be on that journey than to just try to ignore it.
It was funny that you used the word frivolous, because I do know that there's people that look at this and they're like, oh, those has to do with feelings and blah, blah. And they don't understand that, like, your feelings are what guide you through the actions that you take. If
Absolutely.
You don't feel that you're good enough to do something, if you feel that you're not qualified to do something,
that you're not capable,
you're not going to do that. And all of that comes back to how you're using your imagination and whether or not you're afraid to move forward in something because you're just not good enough or you're not capable. And the only way to really investigate that is to go into those insecurities and take a look at that and determine for yourself, be able to walk away from that and say, okay, that's fine. This is the program. This is the imaginary movie that I've been playing in my head, the virtual reality game that I've been playing in my head this entire time. Now it's time to switch it. And I'm going to be a freaking badass and I'm going to beat the game.
I'm going to not relent. I will not relent.
Exactly.
Your imagination will not relent.
Yes.
It does that for you.
And
it's helpful that it does that.
Your imagination will not relent because it's going to ask all those questions that are open-ended that you haven't answered for yourself. It's going to ask you all of those. It's going to show you those situations that you're completely terrified of so that you could actually face them head on and get over it, or at least find a way to be able to move past it so that you could keep moving forward. Because if not, it's just a roadblock, and then boom, it happens, and there you stop.
And this is a beautiful, beautiful thing that I've only recently come to realize. I used to feel like such a victim to the fact that these horrible scenarios would play out in my imagination that would make me feel terrible. And in realizing, oh my gosh, that's actually a tool I have in my arsenal, that my imagination is going to allow me to face this fear without actually having to go through it.
Exactly.
That is incredible, because I can come out the other side of that way stronger.
Exactly.
And I don't have to live it. But if I don't face it, it's going to keep playing on repeat.
People have these different beliefs about imagination. The fact is, like, your imagination is powerful, no matter who you are, right? And then the more that you consciously use it and stuff like that, which is very easy. It's not like you have to go through this regimented thing. Like, you use your imagination all the time. You just got to make the connection that, oh, I could use my imagination. But I think about things like, they talk about Tesla and how Tesla would sit there and like build these machines in his brain, and and Einstein would have these, I forget what it's called, but like basically he'd sit in meditation and think of problem solving.
Oh yeah, when you compare yourself to someone like that, it's easy to feel like you fall short.
Right, except you don't. They didn't have any additional faculties going on there. They just had more practice.
Absolutely.
And it really doesn't take years and years of practice. Honestly, if you were to sit there and consistently use your imagination purposefully for like 30 days in a row, you'd be a master at it. It doesn't take that much practice to use something that you already utilize all the time. People convince themselves that it's hard. But that is your imagination.
Absolutely.
And it's like, it's such a difficult thing to quantify and talk about, because essentially you are viewing the world through your imagination, your biases, the filter that you see the world through, whether it's positive or negative, is through your imagination.
Even who you are, like who you picture when asked to picture yourself,
right,
is your imagination.
Is your imagination. And for the most part, a lot of us think that our imagination is like the voice of God telling you what's happening right now. It's like the narrator of our life that's telling us the truth, when in actuality, it's just your imagination. And you are the one that controls your imagination. It does not control you, unless you let your imagination just run away with you.
Which a lot of us do. And I think that's the thing, is that when a lot of us are describing having a weak imagination, we're describing being unpracticed at deliberately directing our imagination in the ways that we want it to go.
Yeah.
And I think I love that we're talking about this and spending time talking about this, because we're talking about the virtual reality engine, as you call it, which I love, that basically defines what your reality looks like, how you see the world, who you are as a person, what decisions you make, what you think you're capable of, how far you're willing to go, and basically every technological advancement that mankind has ever come up with. Like, it's the birthplace of all of that.
Right.
And we either ignore it or feel like we have no control over it, or we're like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And here's this thing that you have at your disposal.
And it's visceral. Like, it is not just like, it's not a movie reel that's playing in your head. It is a virtual reality, full inclusive virtual reality that involves sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, all of it. Mm-hmm. All of it. It is fully immersive. And I think, because a lot of people think imagination, oh, it's like a movie. I'm playing back. It's not. It is fully immersive. It's the same thing as if I say red, delicious apple. Mm-hmm. And then you picture biting that apple. and now you're holding this apple in your hand and you can feel it in your hand, and you are looking at the area where you just bit into the apple. For some of us, our mouths are going to water just from that.
Mine is right now.
Yeah. So like, and that is the power of your imagination. Now, the other thing to notice there, though, and to become aware of, is that your imagination was affected by the words that came out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding that certain situations and circumstances, when it comes to money or when it comes to experiences that you've had, it is going to trigger those things in your imagination. And so understanding that it's not because you're on autopilot, something has to get instigated, whether it's a thought or something that happened or somebody said a word. Something has to get instigated that is going to trigger that, maybe let's say a bad memory, into your imagination. But the fact that it did get triggered is your opportunity to actually face it in that virtual reality place.
Understanding that I hold all the power there. What I choose to do with that is up to me.
Because a lot of people feel like a victim to their own mind. They're like, why is it that I think this way? Well, because you formed a habit of thinking that way.
And it's okay. All of us have done that to some degree.
Yeah.
It's totally okay.
And it's not something that, listen, I am not a master in this. I am a student. But, and honestly, even if somebody says that they're a master at meditation and a master at like their imagination and all that stuff, they're a student. Nobody's ever going to reach the end of this. This is something that we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives because we are so multifaceted. We are very, very complex beings. There's no way that, we're not a one-note tune.
Mm-mm.
This isn't something that you're going to figure out. It's not like, oh, now that I do my imagination and I'm taking control of it, now I could get rid of all my insecurities. Like, that's not going to happen because as you get rid of those layers of the onion, you're going to have more crap underneath it.
It's kind of an endless onion.
It is.
Yeah.
But the good news is that it doesn't have to be so dire all the time. I remember living that life for the majority of my life where I was chronically depressed, and the fact of the matter was that I did not talk good to myself. My imagination, it was a weapon. I always felt like it was a weapon that was used against me, like there was something wrong with me, that like there was something wrong with my mind, that I just could not change the way that I thought about myself. I felt like a victim to my own imagination and my own mind, and understanding that like, hey, listen, things get triggered by events, but unless you're running away from it, you can face it.
Absolutely. I've had similar feelings like that and gone through similar struggles. As someone who was also diagnosed with chronic depression and obsessive compulsive disorder, you want to talk about feeling like a victim to your imagination.
Right.
When you have obsessive compulsive disorder and you're feeling like there's nothing you can do about it, you basically feel like you're imagining all of these completely irrational scenarios, and there's nothing you can do about it except do these behaviors that help quell the fear, and if you will.
What's funny about that is that those behaviors and those identifiers, right, that we use our imagination almost to quantify the fact that like you're going to talk about your thing, and then my imagination is going to say, yeah, but you don't understand what I'm going through. Like, it's easy for you because you're da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And what I found was that during those times, it was almost like it was a competition of like, well, I'm more depressed than you are.
Oh, sure.
It was almost like a badge. It's so weird because everything gets turned around when you're not facing your fears and not actually being in a place where you could really, really delve in there and question the things that you know. Everything gets so mixed up to the point where you almost wear that as a badge of individuality.
Yeah, and I think the reason you do that is because inside you don't feel like there's much else you can do about it.
Right.
So if I can't help myself, then at least I can try to make the world understand
Right.
what I'm going through. When the truth, my truth anyway, is that everyone is going through some iteration, some variance, their own
Right.
experience, depression, OCD,
Isolation,
bipolar, all kinds of the ways that these things manifest. And I decided, contrary to what I was being told, that I was going to attempt to work with my own mind and work with my imagination,
right,
to get a handle on this, to not feel like a victim, feel empowered.
When I look at a lot of people that are in the same shoes as me, like, here we are, we want to be artists, this is what we want to do, we're kind of going against the status quo, and then on top of that you throw some of these issues, that we grew up with, where like maybe I was depressed, or I've dealt with things. The fact of the matter is that it's way more common than we talk about.
Oh yeah.
It should.
Oh yeah.
This is a subject that I think everybody should talk about openly, and that way maybe people wouldn't feel so isolated all the time. It's interesting to me that as artists, like it's like you're facing the world and society that it's just normal to be normal, and you're already doing something that's completely weird. And then on the inside, you have these things where you have insecurity, and you identify with all these things that are already designed to hold you back. And so, like, you could see where this kind of thing, like really taking a look at these insecurities and the things that pop into your mind, how they are going to help you get the confidence to be able to blaze your own trail and move forward. Because essentially, it's almost like if you're letting things go without questioning them, questioning your imagination, and really using it instead of it using you, you get dragged down easily, because you've got so-and-so said this thing, and then it triggers that thought in your imagination of how you suck and how you shouldn't put your art out there, and how if you do put your art out there, you're imagining this worst case scenario where like everybody's laughing at you and they set your art on fire or something like that. And on top of that, you're dealing with your depression, and there's a part of you. Our brains are so complex, and our imaginations are so complex and able to play out a full-on story with music and feeling and temperature and all that stuff, the violins playing off in the background, and even foreshadowing, where you're in a moment in your imagination and you're already foreshadowing the future of where you're going to be crying and feeling miserable.
For sure, and it can seem insurmountable, like a dragon that you could never slay.
Exactly. Identifying with those things on top of facing the reality of like not being able to pay your bills and stuff. And so like our imaginations are super, super powerful. But if you are running away from it and not facing that movie, that virtual reality, basically that thing that you said that is so awesome, that now I could go and face this thing
without having to live it. Understanding that you are living it for all intents and purposes, because it's going to seem very real to you, and it's going to come with all the pain and all the fear and all the various emotions, but you are still in the safety of whatever space you sit within.
And you could rewind it.
And do it over again. I feel fortunate enough that in my own journey, I reached a breaking point with my OCD, and I don't want to get too much into that because everyone's got their own thing, but I reached a breaking point where I was no longer willing to just sit idly by.
Right.
I think a lot of people reach that breaking point.
Yeah.
Where, nope, not going to live this way. Got to do something. Got to figure it out one day at a time. And whether you get there or maybe you hear something or someone says something to you that puts you on that way of thinking of like, you know what? This is my virtual reality engine.
Right.
It's not going to hurt me to try and work with it instead of work against it.
You said something really, really powerful there, which I think just really sends that entire thing home of deciding to use your imagination in a powerful way, which is you could get to a point, because my life changed the moment that I looked at my life and I said enough. My life is way too short. I do not want to waste a single moment doing such and such thing, thinking such and such thing,
feeling completely out of control,
such and such. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, when you get to that point, there's something so empowering about that, where you're like, no, and you mean it. You know, you stomp your foot down and you're like, no more of this. I am done.
Yeah.
With this.
And was everything sunshine and rainbows after that?
Oh, no.
Hell no.
No. But
it is a one day at a time journey.
But and at that point, there was just the determination, and there was the ruthless continuation of self-love.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Ruthless continuation of self-love. So, with the knowledge that we could write an entire book on the imagination and everything that comes along with it, the dark and the bright, the scary and the wondrous, I guess we'll leave our thoughts there.
Yeah. So let's go on to the next chapter then.
Okay.
All right. And that concludes this section of the audiobook. Thank you so much for listening, you guys. If you would like, you can proceed to the next section. Have an awesome day. Adios.